Good evening or good afternoon, whichever it may be in your part of the world. This is Professor Hamamoto, and the date is February 23rd, year 2021. And I welcome you to today's talk, which I have titled Play Me Backwards: The Politics of Ritual Abuse and Enslavement. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I've decided to take the plunge in a very well-worn topic, but as you will soon see, my interpretation and the information that I bring to the talk today far exceeds most of the material that you'll find on YouTube, which is mostly recycled hash. Well, with that bit of bragging, let me tell you a little bit of the backstory of how I came to this particular investigation or this particular thread, because I've been looking at, as you know, if you've been following my talks, and I have a playlist for people who are new to this channel. Please subscribe to it and share it. I want to grow this channel large enough where I can bid YouTube and all social media goodbye. I'm going to deplatform them and go to the web or some alternative outlet, because there's no hope for you. You're part of the abusive system that needs to be shunned at minimum, or just rejected. So thank you very much for that. The backstory takes us to Davis, California. It's a college town. It used to be a fairly rural, ex-urban environment. Today, it's a bustling. Oh, it's across the causeway of the Sacramento River from the city of Sacramento, which is the state capital, and it's the county capital as well. And but it's the home also to the place where I used to work, the University of California, Davis. And I had occasion to be invited to one of the local churches. Yes, there are any number of churches and masjids and temples that serve the Davis community, and I went to one in particular that was right across the campus, the UC Davis campus, appropriately enough, and I felt that that was a really good sign that all was not lost at the University of California, Davis, or in the UC system, or at the universities in general. And the reason I state this is because a part of the problem that we're seeing, a large part of the problem that we're seeing at the university, goes far beyond the quote unquote libtards, right? All the name calling that goes, oh yeah, Jigglypuff and all those crazy professors teaching GLBTQ studies. And ladies and gentlemen, all that stuff is a distraction, intentionally so, to take focus away from the central problem that exists in higher education. And let us call that the ephebophilia industrial complex. That is, you have an institution that really operates on a patronage system between younger men and older men, with women thrown into the mix here and there, but it's primarily going back, it's modeled on the Greco-Roman tradition, or the Grecian ideal, male masculine ideal of what they themselves call the higher sodomy, right? And that has been true in the monasteries, out of which the medieval university evolved, and the modern university, or the multiversity, as a former president of the University of California system once called it, Dr. Clark Kerr, I believe is his name, Kerr. And later on, in reflecting back on it, he realized what a door he was opening for all manner of technocratic power trippers. And that's really going to be the talk today, about these technocratic elites that have infiltrated every single institution, particularly the university, in order to bring about their designs. And their grand design, gosh, it goes back 4 centuries at least, maybe even maybe even further than that, maybe back to the latter Renaissance, or if you're British, Renaissance period. But be that as may, we'll leave the periodization to other people. Let me just state that what we're dealing with here is a problem of multi-generational import. It goes back hundreds of years. So it's not a matter of draining the swamp. I know we as Americans like to just drive through a window and get a Happy Meal and then be on our way. And we want to be able to watch everything in 30 to 60, maybe even 90 minutes, right? It's go, go, go. It's fast, fast, fast. We want a quick fix. We want a president who's going to solve all the problems of the world within 4 years. Otherwise, he's an utter failure, right? We like our super irritable bowel now, and then we walk on to something else, right? So, but I'm sorry to tell you that this is a process that requires a lot of work, and it requires a very profound historical appreciation, a historical consciousness. And this is where you come in. You, me, all of us are products of this history. And part of the reason why I'm giving these talks is to situate yourself, you and your family, your relatives, and all your friends within this historical matrix. Because once you begin to understand you as being a historical actor, then we can begin to make substantive political change, and we won't have to wait for the man in the white horse or the orange hair or whoever else is being put out there as our savior, right? We can depend upon our own history and our own experience and our own understanding of it to take back the American Republic. That's the principles upon which the founding fathers had envisioned the city on a hill, as it's been articulated by Reverend Winthrop way back when. And we're going to recover that high ground. We are going to, because the vision has not gone away, and it's coming far more closer into focus now than we've seen in decades. So persist, start thinking of yourself as a historical subject, a historical actor. Let's say actor, because that's more of a participatory, involved state of being instead of being a subject, that is someone who's just being acted upon. And I'll that's a little bit abstract now, but I'll explain to you how individual lives are what really shape history, cultural history, political history, and shape society. And this is true in the case of one particular individual that I have been interested in since I think I was 12 or 13, maybe at the latest 14 years old. And that is one Joan Baez. But first, let me finish the story about how I came upon this topic. I was invited to this church to attend a talk by he's not in academia, I don't think, or maybe he does have an academic position, but he was mostly, I think for most of his career, he was with the United States Air Force. And his wife and co-researcher might be I don't really know exactly, but I think she might be a practicing therapist. I think they're both practicing therapists, but don't hold me to that. Nonetheless, their perspective far exceeds what I thought I was going to be getting. That is sort of a therapeutic approach to a substantial problem in Anglo-American society, probably world society, but let's focus on what we know best here in the United States, and to a certain extent, Britain. So James Randall Noblet, I'm sorry, I think his name is pronounced, and his wife and research partner, Pamela Perskin Noblet, and he went by Randy, so I'll refer to him as Randy in this talk. And it was he and only who was up there, but his wife was in the crowd, and I saw her and went to pay my respects. And in fact, when I got my book signed, I had taken the step of ordering the book ahead of time so I could bring it to the talk and get a inscription from both authors. So I went up there after the talk, I got the inscription, And I went over to the front row where Dr. Pamela Perskin Noblet was sitting and asked her if she'd sign it. And she pretended, oh, I'm just a helper here. I'm just, so no, no, I know better than that. You put a lot into this work, and I appreciate it. So I have that as a keepsake. And I didn't bring it here. I have it on the shelf here someplace, or it might be packed up. But I went through it very carefully. And the title of that book, if you want to get it, it's these books are somewhat expensive because they're for professionals. Whether you're in engineering or in medicine or in the psychotherapeutic area, the professional books tend to be quite expensive because they don't sell a lot of copies. And this is what people consult for their professions, right? But nonetheless, if you can overcome that, by all means, pick up the book, or you can find it at your local library if they're still open. It's titled Cult and Ritual Abuse, Narratives, Evidence, and Healing Approaches. It's in the third edition, published by Prager in Santa Barbara, California, 2014. So it's fairly new. I should tell you a little bit about Prager publishers. And this is very important. When you're reading any type of book, look at not just the author, and figure out who this person is, what they do professionally. Check out the copyright. You want to see how old the book is. But you also want to check out the publisher, because sometimes oftentimes, as I've found it since I'm a published author many times over. In fact, I've been published by Prager. That's why I'm mentioning it here. This is a Prager book. You'll see that in many types of scholarly, intellectual publishing or cultural endeavors, whether it's Lego or Ant Farm or Soups, whatever it might be within the larger culture, you'll see that more often than not, it has a connection to the intelligence community, as it's sometimes called. And there's a great book by Wayne Madsen. I can't remember the exact title, but if you look under Wayne Madsen in your usual booksellers, you'll find this book that talks all about the CIA fronts, and you'll have any number of publishers listed, book publishers, magazine publishers as well. And one of the names that should be in there, if it's not, I'd be very surprised. One of the publishers listed there is Prager, Praeger. And the old man's name, the founder, was Frederick Prager. And I think he was either a German or Austrian refugee. And now that I think about it, I'd have to look up Frederick Prager and see if he was not a paperclip type publisher, because a lot of these people come from overseas and set up shop here. Another one is Schocken, Schocken. They set up here primarily in New York, sometimes Chicago. Prager always had their headquarters in Boulder, Colorado, which is an intelligence center hub. They use the resources of the University of California, no doubt. But now I see they're here in beautiful Santa Barbara, California, where a lot of globalists live in that beautiful it's still Southern California, but you're getting into Northern California once you pass Santa Barbara. And the neighboring community of Atherton is affluent. And St. Oprah Winfrey has a home there, one of her homes. I think she also is buying up properties in Maui. And then she has her little, quote unquote, girls' school in South Africa, I believe, and homes everywhere else. So it's a globalist town. And that confirms my suspicion. Not that Randy Noblet and Pamela Noblet have any connection with the community, because intelligence community, because I myself have published with Prager. That was my first academic book way back in 1989. And believe me, back then, I didn't know that Prager was connected in such a way. So with that caveat, because I know that some people who are watching this are nitpickers, either by attitude or just for fun or lack of anything better to do with your life. So yeah, I'm aware that Prager is connected to intelligence, right? Okay, and I'm not going to belabor these points as we go down these. Otherwise, this talk will. I'm already 15 minutes into it, and I haven't really gotten into the heart of the talk today. So I got the autographed copy, but the important part for today's talk concerns Randy Noblet just in passing, mentioning the song Play Me Backward by Joan Baez, because he was giving it was a 1 hour talk. I have it on tape, by the way. I'm not putting it on YouTube. I believe that's maybe later. Maybe I'll play excerpts. It was an excellent talk. I don't need to tell you. Randy Noblet is considered to be at the top of his field, rightly so. He and his wife have been publishing in the area for years and years, and they have plenty of clinical experience in addition to that. But anyway, Randy mentioned in passing the recording by Joan Baez, Play Me Backwards. And I went to the People's Resource. It's called YOUBE, or YouTube. I call it YOUBE. And I'll be trying to leave YOUBE as soon as I can. I'm going to deplatform them before they deplatform me and go to the web or sell my show into syndication. That's the idea, which will also have a call-in feature, two-way call-in feature, so we can talk about these issues. Maybe you have experienced something similar to Joan Baez. I think it would be highly instructive to hear from someone who's not a worldwide celebrity like Joan Baez, who has been through this process. And I mean, it shouldn't be just therapists and professionals who are privy to this information, because I think it's so pervasive. We need to really, really suss it out without having to go through the professionals and the gatekeepers, of which publishers, the academic world, and other professional bodies, the American Psychological Association, for example, they all serve a gatekeeper. Gatekeeper meaning they take the money, but also they keep out people that they don't want inside the gate. I say tear down the gates, tear down the walls, let us all in. It's called open source. Someone has, already begun to exploit that term, and don't associate me with him. Okay, he didn't invent the term. He only tried to exploit it. That's not what I'm doing here. But yeah, tear down the fences and let us have this information directly. And we're going to do that before too long if I have anything to say about it, and I do. So I listen to the People's Jukebox, which is YouTube, and I listen to it, and I go, oh my God. I mean, just on one listening, I said, I understand what Dr. Noblet was talking about. And then I went to the various resources that are available online, and I looked at the lyrics, and I posted it for your purpose so that you could read along, because music, sometimes it kind of passes through you. When you have it in black and white, it takes on a different meaning. I think most of you who are at this talk here have listened to the song. I know that Tyrone mentioned in the chat even before we started that he listened to it. So he's done his homework. He's done his prep work, and many of you have read the lyrics as well. And in this, and I have the link, I posted it on my Facebook. I have the link where on, again, YOUBE, the People's Jukebox, whoever posted it, Rand Crook, whoever that is, whoever posted it did not know what a gem he had found here, because in this particular posting dated 2011 August, I have the link there. I'll put the link in this particular talk as well, to save you time and just sort of provide all the different tools you will need to understand this pervasive problem in American and Anglo-American society. But it's a live concert of Joan Baez singing Play Me Backward, 1991, right outside Leopold's record store in Berkeley, California. I think it's long gone by. I think it's a fallen victim to Amazon.com. I think some of the other record stores, what is it called? I can't remember. I haven't been to the record store. I used to go record shopping in Berkeley and book shopping in Berkeley all the time. There were Moe's Books and all. Yeah, I won't go into that, but books were a very important part of the Joan Baez milieu of the late 50s and 60s. She comes right out of the college coffee house scene, even though I don't think ever went to college herself. Very literate, highly intelligent family, well accomplished. And I'll be talking about her father in a moment. He's very much a part of this story. So check out that live performance where she, in introducing Play Me Backwards, explicitly says, well, there's a story about, back masking. There's supposedly, if you listen to a song backwards, you'll hear all these satanic messages. But she says, no, that's not what it's about. It's about ritual satanic abuse of children. She says it right there on a video. It's not coming from me. And remember, this is an educational channel, ladies and gentlemen, or YouTube people. This is education. This is about how our political, social, and cultural system operates. This is the glue. It's the ephebophilia, military-industrial pedophilia, child abuse, trafficking complex that we're trying to pull out of. And thank God for President Donald Trump, who made great strides. And if that is all he can be credited for in his first term in office, then we as human beings can be eternally grateful for that, for him and the First Lady, Melania Trump, for tackling that problem. Because once that edifice begins to crumble, and it already is, by the way, it's already beginning to happen, then we can start making substantive improvement in the political system. You're not going to swap out the Congress people from the House of Representatives or from the Senate or the Supreme Court until we tackle this deeper in academia, of course, and the military, all the the judicial system. You're not going to reform any of these until you really get at the engine, the trauma, if you will, that has been inflicted multi-generationally on the American people. And how do I know this? Well, I read the literature, I read the history. Many of you know that I have become a V.C. Andrews fan. I'm dedicated to reading all 6 or 7 of the volumes that she wrote before some guy took it over. All the later V.C. Andrews books are written by some guy. And this is the 2nd volume. I'm more than halfway through it. And it's just full, not ritualistically, it's full of familial incest and intergenerational sex and all kinds of kinky stuff. And she was a writer. V.C. Andrews was a writer of fiction, but she was a documentarian of what was going around her in Virginia Beach, which is heavily establishment, especially military, especially U.S. Marine Corps, and especially Congress and all the institutions I mentioned. Virginia Beach is one of their playgrounds. And she was a V.C. Andrews, a wheelchair-bound individual, so she could just sit at the window and look out and see and hear and observe, and then she put it all in fiction. So you have fiction, you have going back to the reign of King James I. He wrote an entire book. You can get this public domain, but an enterprising, I guess, former Luciferian, Tarl Warwick, who gives, by the way, excellent political commentary. I'm glad that he's turned away from at least he claims to has turned away from the dark side, but he's published The Demonology of King James I. It's a thin essay, and he was an intellectual, unlike the current occupants or subsequent occupants of the throne, who due to generations of incest and inbreeding, their mind starts to go, right? And their chin becomes recessive, as they're called in Britain. They're called chinless wonders. So they have to go into another genetic pool. Let's say the house that Diana Spencer comes from, in order to start having normal children again, and people of average or above average intelligence. Right? She comes from the Stuart line. That's right. Princess Diana comes from the House of Stuart, which is the true legitimate heir to the British throne. Some would argue. I'm not going to get into that fight. So it goes back to King James, and you have the Bible. both the books of Moses and what's called the New Testament as well. And I got a couple of new volumes, by the way. I'm really happy about it. It's incredible scholarship and commentary, annotations galore, historical, without ironically being preachy about it. It's a really incredible piece of scholarship. It's called the Norton English Bible, as in Norton Publishers. And you could read about demons and devils and other such entities to your heart's content. And then you have historically, you have organizations. They're actually usually men's club. Remember, I've told you it's a phebophilia. The progress that women have made since the so-called women's liberation is primarily an illusion. It's illusory. It's still very much male power that runs the world. It's male ephemophilic Greek ideal higher sodomy type power, and they put women and minorities in certain window dressing positions to make it look like they run stuff, but not really. It's these individuals who were in the hell. Happens to deal with the Irish hellfire clubs, and it sums up what they're about. Nor was it particularly, I'm reading here, nor was it particularly unusual that the Hellfire Club members had esoteric interest and may have engaged in mysterious rituals. Practices and ceremonies of this kind were integral to the Freemasons, and the Freemasons were one of the largest and most respectful associations in the country. They were not a secret society, that's a misnomer. Everybody knew about them. As we do now, we're finally beginning to understand that these particular organizations are part of the warp and woof of American history, of world history. And it was not taught in our public schools. I didn't learn about it until I've told this story before, until I ran into some people in my same age group who were from Catholic school. They went, but they knew all about it. That was part of their pedagogy, but not in public school. And I credit them with really, and I was, I was 15. I credit them for really helping me understand history in a far different way, much earlier than most kids my age. So let me go a little bit into the cultural history of out of which Joan Baez originates. It's important, just as your culture, even if you're a product of the 70s or 80s. I know there are all these cliches associated with it, but really, yourself, just start checking out what was going on that time. Read all the way, seemingly superficial, the fashions, the hairstyles, the dances, the fads, the popular culture, in other words. That's all data points for an understanding of your historical positioning within this panorama of evil, I guess, of good and evil, right? So let me place Joan Baez in a similar situation, but going back to the late 1940s and 50s up to the late 50s, the social history. Well, Joan Baez is one of the main figures in what's called, by the cultural historians, again, the folk revival, F-O-L-K, folk. The folk revival of the late 1950s. And I say late 90s because there have been revivals or mini revivals since then. And there are revivals prior to that, and maybe there'll be some later. But this one here has a specific importance to our discussion and to history in general. Now, the folk revival preceded the hippie era that started kicking in around 64, 65, 67, maybe about 10 years. But the beatniks are associated with the folk revival. These are the people in the caricatures in Mad Magazine, for example, that wore the berets and they had dark glasses even at night, and they did a lot of smoking and they drank coffee and they read existential literature, all the caricatures. That was the folk revival. Coffee houses were real, though. This is where young people went to college age, older teenagers, and some people, since there was no alcohol served, I guess you can be 13, 14, 15 years old, like Joan Baez or her younger sister, Mimi Baez, and go to a coffee shop and hang out with aspiring intellectuals who are reading all the latest in French existential literature and watching all of the great films coming from Italy and France and even Japan. There was a revolution going on. It's an interesting time. And it's no surprise that it's of interest to a lot of young people today. And I encourage all of you to read some of the work there, look at the movies, look at the milieu. It's a pivotal moment in not just American history, but world history as well. So she comes out of that. She's a teenager. She was hanging out in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And you know, Cambridge is the home to two elite institutions, one Harvard University, the other one being MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, right? And her father had brought them there because Albert V. Baez was an academic. But he was more than that, as I will get to as we move in here. And this might be another two-part. I know I will say that, I need another. But what will happen is I'll probably return to it at a later time, but I'll at least talk about the high points of Professor or Dr. Baez's career as I talk about his daughter's career, Joan Baez. Because it might be that there was some intergenerational, I don't know, father and daughter incest, like V.C. Andrews. I'm not really sure. That's really up in the air. That's to be discovered or disclosed by Joan Baez herself, who's still very much in public. She performs, not regularly, but she's there, and her voice is great as ever, and she's as beautiful today as she was when she first hit the scene, I think, when she was 18 or 19 years old. Incredibly young. She was older teenager when she first just exploded onto the scene, and it was above my head because I was a rugrat at the point. I was probably more interested in baseball, but by the time I was 13 or 14 years old, like all the other boys in junior high school, we thought Joan Baez was the woman of our wet dreams, right? She had it all, the sensitivity. She's beautiful. She looked like the Madonna. She had perfectly straight hair. She parted it right down the middle. She looked like a peasant woman. And by the way, back then women had perms, permanents. Like, there was something that my mother and sisters had that smelled up the house. They call it a Tony home permanent. It was some caustic, and you can put curlers. I mean, it was a different style, but here she is. She looks like something pure right out of the countryside. Something right out of a painting, a religious painting. I mean, it had that aura around her television presence. And yeah, she would be on TV, not that often, but she would be on black and white TV. That was Joan Baez. And everybody in my school knew who she was, and all the girls wanted to look like her. So the folk revival, not surprisingly, took hold in the college towns across the United States. I'm sure in Canada there was something similar going on. People like Joni Mitchell, and I saw a documentary on Gordon Lightfoot recently. They come out of that milieu up in Canada, right? And in Europe, there was a scene going on, in some of the larger cities in Japan, such as Tokyo or Osaka. There were these cafes and became like a global beat culture. Very interesting. It just sort of took, because this is the beginnings, of course, of mass communications, radio publications, before internet. TV was just kind of coming in, movies, of course, newsreels. So we were starting to have the beginnings of sort of a global beatnik culture, if you will. So you have Cambridge, as I mentioned, where the coffee house and folk revival took root. You have Berkeley, California, not far from where I am. Madison, right? University of Wisconsin. And this is where all your baby boomer liberals came out of, the people on the left, right? And this is people of a little bit older than me, but I feel I identify very strongly with his milieu. I was a kid, but I was an aspirational beatnik. and I was too young to be a hippie. So I was an aspirational hippie. And just like any young kid, you're always looking at the generation ahead of you going, oh man, when I grow up, I want to be that. And what happened by the time I came of age? What did I meet with? Yes, disco. Right. Polyester jeans and platform shoes. So I missed out. So maybe I'm romanticizing it. I know I am, but bear with me, please. We're taking a trip. It's not a nostalgic trip, but we're taking a trip to the past. Now, if you want to read an excellent book, still sticks in my mind after all those years, about that milieu, it's titled Positively Fourth Street, published in 2001 by David Hajdu. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Hajdu. That's probably the best book, and I've read a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. It's probably the best book that I've seen where it captures the sort of the Greenwich Village of the late 50s through the early 60s, maybe up until the the folk revival, as we've talked about. And Positively 4th Street. I live near 4th. I guess that's the village, right? Right. West 4th Street. I lived, by the way, about 2 minutes away from Washington Square. I was taught at New York University one year, and they set me up with an apartment. And I saw all the folk clubs, but by the time I was there, it was pretty much dead. And all the Wall Street types and the trust fund babies by then had bought up most of the village. The East Village was still kind of happening to a certain extent, but all the Wall Street people had moved down there and down in Soho and all that. So it wasn't like anything like it was back in those days. Same with Berkeley and all the other cool places. So if you go to the village, hoping to see that, it's more like Disneyland that you'll encounter. But read that book, Positively 4th Street, and that's a title of a very important song by Bob Dylan. And why Bob Dylan? Why do I bring his name up? Because he and Joan Baez were a couple. I think they were even intimate. It was kind of a strained relationship, and neither of them have really gone into great detail about the relationship itself, but there's been plenty of exploration and hypotheses. And Joan Baez wrote an incredible song. She doesn't write a lot of her own songs. She does write a few. She's written more than most, but she primarily is an interpreter of songs. But probably my favorite of her songs is Diamonds and Rust. Has a great guitar intro, a great arrangement, a great production, great everything, great songwriting. But it's about Bob Dylan. It's about her relationship to Bob Dylan. So go on YOUBE and listen to Diamonds and Rust. And man, you will cry. Put yourself into that situation. And it's an incredible tune. So that's where Bob Dylan comes in. But this talk is not about Bob Dylan, who is, as you know, a recipient of the Nobel Prize for something or other, literature, I think. And there are courses taught on Bob Dylan, Dylanology, right? A.J. Weberman was the first one to coin the term. I'm a Dylanologist. I explore and he's proven to be himself to have been a substantive and incredible contributor to American letters and world letters. So he's very much deserving of all the accolades that he has. But I think there's more to be said and written and explored and investigated about one Robert Zimmerman, which is his name, and Bob Dylan, who comes out of Hibbing, Minnesota, who gravitated, sort of like Joan Baez and other young people, to the Greenwich Village at a certain moment of time and catapulted their way into the forefront of what was to become the counterculture. And that's why I mentioned the Sixties Haters and all the Dave McGowan fans that always put comments. Oh, yeah, you got to read Strange Scenes from Laurel Canyon and all, as if that really encapsulates what this whole scene was about. It's not scene, this history, this very rich history was about. And I said it before, and I'll say it again. That book is a PsyOps, and others like them, and the people who are promoting this, lock, stock, and barrel, have fallen for the trap, just like you fell for QAnon. You're falling for the PsyOps about the 60s and the counter and the Beatles, all you Beatles haters. You're in the same bag. But anyway, that's another talk. In fact, I think I'm going to hold a pay-per-view global call-in marathon on the Beatles. Were they controlled? Are they really a Tavistock Institute creation? Right. And I mention this because some people claim that Joan Baez is a product of a similar type of process. Who knows ultimately? Certainly the people who are making the argument don't know any more than I do. But I think she represents more than that. I think she represents a break from that structure, from that system that she was born into. I think most of her career was spent escaping it and rebelling against it and fighting against it and bringing coded messages to us who were growing up in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2020 milieu of this national security, ephebophilia, NATO state that has grown up in the wake of the National Security Act of 1947 and the assassination of November 1963. I think this is what Joan Baez has been signaling to us all those decades, and as such, she's one of ours. So all you haters, rethink your position. You are the same people who are into hopium and to QAnon. All right, that's my rant against the haters out there, and I'll move on. Don't bother making a comment. Go ahead, make your comments. You're an ass, and you haven't really taken any time to really do any investigating. You're a repeater, just like most of the people who have done supposed research on Joan Baez and Bob Dylan and that whole scene are supposedly researchers. No, you're repeaters. Okay, so you want some originality, okay? And that's what I'm going to give you here in a moment. But let me finish the milieu here because there's some interesting part. And by the way, that doesn't mean that I don't rely on previous work. I read Positively 4th Street, and I've read the material, right? So you don't have to refer to them. Been there, done that, and I know the BS from the real stuff. And let me briefly then talk about the contribution of the end of one person by the name of Harry Smith. He had a collection of 78s. That was the format before the 45, before the 33 and a third long play. And there was even a 16 RPM. And of course, those of you who grew up in the age of iTunes don't know what I'm talking about. But, your DJ culture, which is very valuable, are very much appreciative of the vinyl culture. And he predates that. We're talking about acetates. We're talking about 78s. Harry Smith had a collection. He went to a guy who ran Folkways Records by the name of Moses Hash. And he said, hey, let's put together an anthology of all this work. Unfortunately, most of this work was still, it was the intellectual property of the labels. So they released it anyway, and it's called the Anthology of American Folk Music. It was released in 1952. And you notice that's just preceding the folk boom. And it was people like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan who referred to these LPs and modeled their work after a lot of what they had heard from an earlier generation of Americans, mostly Scots-Irish immigrants, and to a certain extent, Italian immigrants in the U.S. here, working class mountain people, real American grassroots, right? And even they, by the way, had a connection with commercial music. So this whole notion of folk music or folk culture purity, it's an illusion, and it's something that only folklorists and purists and perception Nazis like to hang on to, because from time immemorial, the music keeps getting worked on, right? And it keeps getting transformed a certain way. So Baez and her generation and Bob Dylan and her generation were introduced to this folk tradition, and they took it a step forward. And they took it in an area that the working class of the Anthology of American Folk Music we're not aware of, and that's these huge total wars of World War II, the Cold War, right? And people like Dylan and Joan Baez and many others, Tom Rush, and many other people. Many of them died young, right? Correctly, correct, right? They did because they were enemies of the state. I won't mention their names. That'll be another talk. Baez survived, and Dylan barely survived. He was in a motorcycle accident, which I think was a warning to him to straighten up and fly right. By right, I mean, right wing, or at least don't be such a leftist, because the folk tradition was connected with the American left. The American Communist Party, socialist, left wing, right, were very much into folk music. And this, of course, disturbed the powers that be. And by the way, the people that you see out there, the Antifas and all those, they're not leftists. They're corporatists in leftist sheep's clothing. That's why this discussion is important. This was the real McCoy that I'm talking about. This movement was organic. Later on, it was infiltrated and it was steered. And by the time we roll out to Antifa and all these pseudo folk people who are sitting at home masked up, saying that they're folk singers and playing to us, saying, "Oh yeah, the incredible lockdown here." They don't call it a lockdown. They just said it's an act of God that we all have to obey. Right? Those are not folk singers. Those are servants of the empire, of the regime. So Harry Smith was a leftist. Moses Ashe, I'm sure, him and his parents, his whole milieu, they were red diaper babies. They were communists. They were people who were battling capitalism, the mine owners, the shop owners, right? They had a legitimate grievance against the forces of capital and Wall Street. The ones we are seeing today are part of Wall Street. They're being funded by they're being sponsored by NATO. They're corporate. They're corporatist drones, but they pretend to be an organic movement. Big difference. All right. So Harry Smith, he was also a Luciferian. He was into the occult. So you have all the different influences and streams running through folk music that people have sometimes a difficult time disentangling. So there is a utility for this type of discussion. One of the people associated with the folk revival was Pete Seeger and his son, to a lesser extent, who became a very important in transmitting the various folk styles of guitar and banjo to younger generations. With Pete Seeger, this might be a name more familiar to you. Pete Seeger influenced Don McLean, right? Or McLean, however you want to pronounce it. We pronounced it Don McLean back then, when he gained notoriety for this great song, the classic tune, Bye Bye American Pie. Remember that one? Maybe you don't. Listen to it. It's a post-war history influenced by the folk tradition. That's Don McLean, by the way. And his mentor was Pete Seeger. That's another story altogether, the Hudson River group of people. Pete Seeger didn't, by the way, the folklore about the folk music is that Pete Seeger did not approve of the electric turn that Dylan took at one of the major festivals, and really thought that Dylan had sold out. That argument has, for the most part, petered out. So we'll leave that behind. I'm just saying that for the nitpickers out there who want to comment. I know the history, believe me. Let me talk more. There's my original contribution here. Okay. After giving you the cultural part of the cultural history, she talks about Play Me Backwards. What is she talking about? Well, there is a technology called backmasking. And even I laughed at it when I first heard about that. You could play a record backwards or take a tape and play it backwards and hear all these satanic messages. And the backmasking controversy resurfaced when the Beatles came out, right? Instead of "I'm the Walrus, I buried Paul," or "Raise me up, dead man," whatever these phrases people thought they were hearing. But as it turns out, backmasking is a real technology. Whether it has been used in certain select identifiable recordings, that's up to debate unless people have admitted or pointed out who are on the session or have the technology and put it on there as sweetening. But I suspect, I've said this in other talks, I suspect that almost all of your streamed music coming out of iTunes and Spotify, I think it has some carrier waves in there. I haven't been able to figure it out. And any of you people who are working on those, please, you make comments about it. You make some intelligent comments about the technology as an engineer, electrical engineer. Any of you who are watching this, I want to talk to you. I want to find out what you're up to. I don't want to talk to the nitpickers who say no. Yeah, the Joan Baez is part of the project. So let me just validate or substantiate my claim that backmasking is a a real technology. I looked it up. Here's an article by an Omar Green. Sounds like a bogus name to me, but anyway, that's how they oftentimes, they meaning General Electric, IBM, or whoever else, put patents out there. They create some kind of name. Omar Green. Here's the title of in the esteemed Journal of Acoustical Society of America, 1952, ladies and gentlemen, right around the time of the folk revival's just about to take off, right? And the title of the article is Backmasking Effect Generator. And he holds a patent, by the way, Omar Green, of the backmasking effect generator, published in the Journal of the Acoustical Society. And by the way, that is the premier journal for people who are involved in what you and I hear as consumers. So if you really want the far up the stream tech skinny on what's going down, read that journal if you can find it. You can't find it in an ordinary public library. And I have the patents. I'm not going to bore you with them. There's a schematic and everything that's been filed at the U.S. Patent Office. It's there. It's for real, and it's in use. I'll throw out a name for you. And I ordered his CD after reading. But these notes, by the way, go back 2 years by now. So I rediscovered a name called a guy named Kendrick Lamar, and he had a CD called Damn, DAMN. And it has, by his own admission, has backmasked messages. And now it's embraced. It's no longer a satanic panic type of conspiracy, because Kendrick Lamar won a Pulitzer Prize for music based on that CD. So I'm very interested in getting it. It's available in our Jeff Bezos's operation. And there's all kinds of academic and medical literature on backmasking now current, right? So Joan Baez, that album came out, 1992? She was telling us the truth. And like I said, Joan Baez is one of us. She listened to what she has to say through the music, not necessarily what she says in the interview, but through any artist, listen to the art. Do not listen to the commentator. Well, you can, but the truth comes in the music or the literature, the fiction, whether it's V.C. Andrews or Joan Baez or Bob Dylan. So here you have Kendrick Lamar being name-checked in the Journal of Speculative Philosophy, 2018, by James B. Hale, Good Kid, MAA City, Kendrick Lamar's Autoethnographic Method. They take him seriously, these academics. Kendrick Lamar, I think we need to check him out, don't you think? Yeah. Another authors in the Lancet Psychiatry Journal. The Lancet is the British medical journal, right? Like the New England Journal. It's on that level. But they also have a psychiatry journal specifically for that subdiscipline. And in Lancet Psychiatry, Kendrick Lamar, street poet of mental health. So you see that his work has now been taken in the direction of so-called mental health. It's just the opposite. I think it's probably out there to damage mental health or bruises even more. Our friend, our ally, our poet, our Madonna, the real one, not the slutty one, who wants to blow up the White House and wears the pussy hat, not her. Joan Baez, she was singing about this and warning us in this incredibly well produced and well written song. It's a good track. His music, well, Play Me Backwards. Natalie Graham, she talks about Kendrick Lamar's backward masking. What slaves we are, narrative, trauma, and power in Kendrick Lamar's roots transition. I guess it's an academic journal. And I have several of them, several articles, both academic and otherwise. Here's a guy I knew who seems to be a very suspicious guy. I won't give you his name. He's a very suspect person in my community who wrote about Kendrick Lamar in the New Yorker magazine. All right. I'm running out of time, so let me briefly talk to you about Alfred V. Baez, and he's been mischaracterized in a lot of the YouTubers and a lot of the online work. This is the same group that wants to delegitimize the 60s. It's sort of the Dave McGowan. Jim Morrison was the son of Admiral Morrison, who was part of the Gulf of Tonkin, and David Crosby and Steve Stills and all those people were just they were just synthetic culture. That people. So there's a lot of misinformation that has been written about Alfred Baez, and I'm still trying to decide, and maybe it's neither nor, but I'm trying to find out if he was on our side, that is the common folk, right, FOLK, or what he was working for the globalists. I tend to think in his later years, he had an awakening. He came to the Friends Church, Quakerism, through his wife, who was also an immigrant from Scotland. He was an immigrant from Mexico, Albert Baez. And they became very true to to their religion as being pacifist and not being involved in war and trying to help humanity in whatever way they can. And the children, especially Joan Baez and her younger sister Mimi, who's another story altogether, which I'll probably pick up later because it fits in with this larger saga. But Alfred Baez was a PhD in physics. He's one of the most important physicists, but who, ironically, his work has become foundational to where we're heading as so far as a worldwide technocratic unified dictatorship. So far as his work being foundational in the creation of a holographic universe, a simulation, a simulated society. I don't think he intended that to happen. I believe, and I could be wrong, but I think that he was trying to use his expertise in physics in order to better humankind. And science can be used. And let's not forget, I mean, all we hear about science being used by these maniacs with lab coats on, or physicists who want to blow up the world, or creating bioweapons and creating hydrogen bomb. Okay, that's one side of it, but there's another side of that technology science for the betterment of humanity. And I'd like to think that Alfred Baez was on that side more than the others. That's not to say that his work has not been exploited and used by the darksiders. I could be wrong. And again, like many of us, he has a mixed career. The reason why he and his family his children were overseas a lot is that he worked for UNESCO. And those of you who are watching know more than I do about the origins of UNESCO as being part of this globalist cabal, if you want to call it, the United Nations Education and Science, right? And it was headed in its original form by our friend Huxley, Julian Huxley, the brother of Aldous Huxley, and most of you know about that. So, and you know that UNESCO is a globalist entity. You know the United Nations / NATO is globalist. He worked for them, but hell, I work for the University of California. It's not as big as UNESCO or the United Nations or NATO, but the whole institution is founded, as I mentioned, on the affiliate NATO, UN, World Health Organization, New World Order complex, and I was part of it. I worked there, so you can damn me if you are a real purist and you yourself think you're serving God, but actually unwittingly, as a friend of mine said, are unwittingly serving Satan. That's probably more the case. So fess up. I'm running out of time here, so let me just briefly state or identify two areas, and I'll return to Dr. Baez here in the next. I'll finish up on Thursday, but he was very much into ellipses, and that caught my eye because I am doing an entire book on the occult meaning of the inauguration on January 6, 2021, where Donald J. Trump, President of the United States, and he might even still be president. If there can be two popes, there could be two U.S. presidents, right? Where he stood on the ellipse in the Capitol Hill, right? Before it was hijacked and taken away. The Republic was taken right before our eyes. So that's one of his areas of expertise, Albert Baez. And you can find this on YouTube. It's called Elliptic Orbits Explained by Albert Baez. It's on YOUBE, the People's Jukebox. The second contribution is he was into holography, Dr. Albert Baez. And as we know, there's these theoretical physicists who are trying to have us become convinced that our whole world, the universe, is a holographic simulation, and we're all just avatars. And it just dawned on me as I was doing this prep work here that that's one of the reasons why everybody's being told to hate their body, to deform it, because they want us to move to they meaning the controllers want to move us into the virtual world, holography. There's all these academic essays about body image and dysmorphia, and because they want you to hate the body, they want you to transcend it, they want you to become an avatar. And ironically enough, it was Dr. Albert Baez who was a holography expert, and he was introducing the whole concept of holography to the general, or not general, but the university or the educational community on the behalf of UNESCO. Look at, again, on YOUBE, the title of the YOUBE, the video is Introduction to Holography, 1972. It's an educational film, credit to Albert Baez for Encyclopedia Britannica Educational Corporation. By the way, I think you'll have to, this is the type of comment that I appreciate. So you can look it up. I think I remember reading something about the Encyclopedia Britannica being another one of those CIA fronts, but you check that out, please, for me. Anyway, that's we can return to that later. But Introduction to Holography, produced by Britannica, right? Britannica. Albert V. Baez, PhD. It's right there in black and white. Faculty, Harvard Summer School, and Science Education Consultant to UN and UNESCO. And he had a Tung H. Jung, PhD at Lake Forest College. He's probably the guy that did all the coolie work in the research. And they put presentable, handsome-looking guys like Dr. Baez out there for the public face of it. It was probably, I suspect it was Jung, because that's done today, by the way. Most of your scientists who are supposedly doing all this virus research, they get all the credit for it. They're put out there by Harvard and Yale and MIT and the University of Wisconsin. It's a Chinese foreign scholar or grad student who's doing the work. I know I saw this at UC Davis all the time, because if something happens, they can blame it on the Chinamen, right? Just like they did back in the old days. And if there's a award to be doled out, then they're going to be the one who get the accolades. That's how the academic world works, ladies and gentlemen. They wanted me to be their Chinaman, and I said, no thanks, no thank you. I don't want to be your coolie. Anyway, check this out for yourself. I'll return to this. I'll try to wrap this up a little bit later. I just wanted to reinforce the point that Ms. Joan Baez is one of ours. She's a believer. She's not a Luciferian. She's not an ogre. She's not she might have fallen victim to some of these behaviors on certain part of certain individuals, whoever they might be, but she has overcome them, and she has emerged whole and integrated as a human being, as a personality, as an artist, as a woman, as an American. And in her, I see great hope for us, we who are not as nearly as talented and gifted and determined and committed as Joan Baez is a human being. So this talk here, I will dedicate to Joan Baez, an incredible humanitarian, a human being. And all you haters, hey, there's another QAnon ready for you, right? It's getting ready, prepared for your consumption. And like a dog, you will return to your vomit. Okay? Sorry to end on such a on a smelly, nasty note, but these are difficult times, and we don't have any time for posers, pretenders, users, copiers, biters, and crybabies, and perception Nazis. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you on Thursday for an even more exciting follow-up. Oh, but before then, please call in. All of you, call in on Wednesday. Tomorrow, I'll be on the second half with a call-in show with the great George Webb. Find that channel. It's worth it. And it'll just be me and George. Just me and George. That's going to be less jock-ridden, hopefully, than they like to have it. But and we're gonna chop it up though. And I have a lot of original material that I'm going to bring to the call. And I want you to bring your questions or your observations to the call. I really want you to connect with us. Don't be shy. You'll get the you'll get the phone, and we will treat your questions and your observations with the utmost respect that it deserves. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you tomorrow and then Thursday back here on this channel. Bye. Thank you for your attention.